right, hello everyone, and welcome in. Welcome to this week's Sports and Leisure History Look Back. We got a great week's worth of history that we're going to get into for the week of May 18th. Really excited to talk about this. We got some baseball, we got some hockey, a few other things. I'm Jeff Klein, as always, and I'm here with my good friend Clayton Hamilton. How you doing, Clayton?
I'm doing well. What a jam-packed Sunday I had today, and a jam-packed weekend as we're getting down to the nuts and bolts of some of the seasons and beginning new seasons. So I'm just full every day. I'm full.
Well, it was jam packed for me because there was baseball and there's a lot to catch up on. I was trying to catch up on a little bit of the basketball. Been busy with life during the week, so just kind of looking back to see sort of the highlights and anything I missed. But I know for you, it must have been very busy because in addition to all those major sports, you're probably watching cycling and
I
alpine
am.
skiing and
There's a
bobsled.
there's a huge day in the Giro up the side of the mountain,
That's
and
right.
Jonas Vingegaard has moved into the Maya Rosa, into the pink jersey, and is well on his way to winning the Giro d'Italia. And I was actually thinking of you today, Jeff, because UCLA won the
Oh yeah,
Big Ten
that's right.
championship in college baseball. They beat Oregon in the most 2026 way possible after blowing a lead and going into extra innings. They had a bases loaded walk-off walk that couldn't be confirmed until after the video review. So in the most anticlimactic way, everyone had to stand around and look at the jumbotron and wait and wait and wait so that he could run home and rip his shirt off and jump up and down like it was really exciting and unexpected. So there
Yeah,
was that.
the game against USC, the prior game, they also went down and then they came back and they had a walk off win. So UCLA getting it done.
And they also did the same in the quarterfinal. So the quarterfinal, the semifinal, and the final, all walk-off victories for UCLA, who will look to have a number one seed when the committee announces the tournament this week.
Never count out the Bruins. They're pretty good this year. Um, Before we move on, though, I want to just make a mention. We had a shocking loss of driver Kyle Busch. Really sad, very shocking, really unexpected. He succumbed to complications around pneumonia. He was young, 41 years old. You hear of people, you know, uh, passing away from pneumonia, but you don't expect someone at 41. So a lot of other medical complications around that. And I think everyone in the world of racing and sports in general really sad about it. Although he was a polarizing driver, but you never want to obviously lose anyone, especially someone who's still in the middle of their fantastic career. Our hearts go out to his loved ones, his fans, his family, everyone who cared about him. But I wanted to ask you, how do you remember Kyle Busch and his career?
I really liked him. He is a local Las Vegas guy. He and his brother were from here. They got their start up at the Las Vegas Motor Speedway and ran go-karts and sprint cars and all those things on the bull ring up there. And I think that I liked him for all of the reasons that most people found him easy to root against. He really was the heel. He was the antithesis of a lot of the drivers, and he sort of really thrived on people hating him. He was like a Bill Lambier character, in that if people were going to hate him, he was going to really sink into that. And one of the things that I've always liked about him is that for a whole lot of people in the sort of society of good deed doers who go around telling everyone how they need to live their life, one of the things that people always say is, right, don't live your life by what other people tell you, and chart your own path and be your own person and don't listen to the outside noise, right? Everyone always says that. And they always champion that until somebody actually does it, until somebody just does not care what you think. And then everyone gets all mad about it. Even though if you did care, they would say, well, you shouldn't care about other people and what they think. And Kyle Busch was that guy. Like, he did not care if you didn't like him. He did not live his life for your approval. And that's what I really liked about him, which is why I gravitated towards him. That and that I love peanut M&Ms, and he had the coolest car in all of NASCAR. It was awesome, his car. But I really liked him, and I liked his sort of willingness to not care about people that didn't care about him.
Yeah, I think sports always needs those kind of villain characters, and I don't mean that in a negative way. He was a part of the racing ecosystem, and you always have to have those characters and those people, like you said, that are people love to hate, and some people love them because of that, and case in point, kind of what you're describing. So, but very sad, really really big loss. Just someone so young, and like I said, in middle of his career, and just shocking loss. So. Sad to see that. There was also some better racing news today. It was the Indy 500. Did you get a chance to catch that?
I did, and this was one of the great Indy 500s that we have had in a while. They had a little bit of weather, which has been a problem recently, and having to stop for rain. They had a minor delay today because of rain, but the racing was spectacular. Everybody made it out of the race safely, which was good. There were a number of crashes, but one of them that was really important was Colette, the rookie from Brazil, whose car caught on fire today. And that really changed the entire dynamic, because Felix Rosenqvist sort of had this race in hand with about 20 laps to go. And that crash reset the field because there was debris all over. So they had to sort of red flag it and hold everybody and, clean up some debris. And then on the restart, there was another crash. So it really turned into a yellow flag, white flag, green flag for the final lap, and the final lap was absolutely dynamic, closest win in history, and it was really great to see Felix Rosenqvist come back and get the victory for Meyershank Racing that he had almost been robbed of by a crash, a number of laps earlier.
Yeah, I'm not the biggest racing fan. Catch highlights so here and there, but I caught that final lap, and even I was excited, was cheering, so really exciting. I was thinking, maybe I need to watch more racing. This is pretty good.
Yeah, you don't see that kind of finish a lot. You see a lot of times it'll come down to the last lap, and you might get a pass and you might not, but I mean, that was just the perfect storm of things that were set up, because they had multiple restarts before they were able to finish it. And you never want to be leading on the restart, because you oftentimes would get jumped, and that's exactly what happened. But it's crazy to think about how the Indy 500 has always been an important part of my life, and part of that has to do with growing up in the Midwest, and it is a massive draw out there. But you know what, Jeff? There were 350,000 people at that race today.
Wow.
So if you put that into perspective, that's 1 out of every 1,000 people in America was at that race. Forget about the people that are watching it. You're just talking about who's physically there. 1 out of every 1,000 people that live in this country was in Indianapolis today at that track. That's crazy.
That is crazy. So you're saying not every race is that exciting? Maybe I won't.
They're not always at the end, like right in the very last lap, like right at that moment. There's a lot of intrigue, and that's why I prefer IndyCar to all of the other racing. I will argue all day long with people from Europe about Formula One, which they say is the greatest thing that's ever happened. But for me, Formula One's probably the least interesting of all of the racing, because there's less passing and it's more about how you prep your car in the garage the week before. But there were 70 lead changes in today's race, which is an IndyCar record. And you'll never have 70 lead changes in a Formula One race, ever. So there's a lot of intrigue as the race progresses in IndyCar in a way that there's not in some tracks at NASCAR and certainly all of Formula One. So if you're going to give auto racing a try, make it IndyCar.
All right. I'll keep that in mind. Okay, well, let's jump into the history. How about And I was actually really excited about this first one we're going to talk about. We posted on May 18th at the beginning of the week because back in 2002, we had one of the greatest fights of our lifetime when Mickey Ward squared off against Arturo Gatti. And some say the ninth round in that fight, where the two fighters stood toe-to-toe, was the round of the century. Announcers in real time proclaimed it one of the greatest rounds they've ever seen. Instant classic. Ring Magazine called the fight of the year. It actually went 10 rounds, with Ward winning by decision. And then Ward and Gatti would meet 2 more times in their trilogy, with Gatti being the victor in the other 2. But in hindsight, everyone gets caught up in this is the greatest thing I've ever seen, and in hindsight, sometimes it's not. But do you think that fight stands up to the hype, or does it stand the test of time, I guess?
100%.
Yeah.
I remember this fight when it happened, and I remember watching it, and I didn't get to see all of the HBO fights. I didn't have HBO, so there was a significant period of boxing that I have seen later in my life because I was able to watch it on other platforms. But at the time, I wasn't able to see. But that was one of the fights that I was able to go someplace that had HBO, and I was able to see it. And man, was it spectacular then. And I went back when you posted about it and rewatched it. Mm-hmm. And I was like, oh, I'll watch the ninth round, and remember that. And then I was like, oh, you know what? I want to watch the whole thing. And I went back and watched the whole thing. And the only fight that I can recall watching that was as good as that was Morales-Barrera 1, which was very much the same thing as this. So for anyone who watches boxing or hasn't seen it a lot and they want it to be like Rocky and Apollo Creed, and they're sad when it's not, this fight is Rocky and Apollo Creed. It is 2 guys standing there wailing on each other for 10 rounds.
It's so funny, and I swear, Clayton and I did not plan this, but I have in my notes that this reminded me exactly of like a Rocky movie, especially in that ninth round, because it was like so what you see in Hollywood, the quintessential fight where 2 fighters are slugging it out in that ninth round. And both were the type of fighter that they were these brawlers who could absorb a lot of punishment. And it was fascinating because in that round, I went back and rewatched it as well. Gatti looks like he's done. And then he seems to get some kind of like a second wind, or, is sort of the moment in Rocky where the fans are cheering for him and he suddenly gets that new surge of energy and he starts fighting back. And it was exactly like that. It was just amazing to watch. And, Gatti, I think a lot of fans remember he was one of the most televised fighters of his era. He was always, appearing on, a lot of the ESPN broadcasts. People got to know him, and Ward was kind of this blue collar fighter, and that fans kind of gravitated to. So they had those sort of narratives coming in there that they were just these 2 guys who could really beat it out.
And it was 2 New England guys, even though Gatti was from Montreal and his parents were from Italy, but he was really from Newark, New Jersey, or Jersey City, New Jersey, and Irish Mickey Ward from just outside of Boston. And they met at Uncasville at the Mohegan Sun in Connecticut, sort of halfway in between, with a pretty split crowd. But you're right, that all the ninth round was missing is the background music, the Rocky music to start. When you hear the ding of the bell and then the first chords of that Rocky comeback music, that was all that was missing from it. And it was funny that Harold Letterman, who did was on the commentary that night, he had said, Ward's got a chance to come back in this fight because Gatti refuses to defend himself. And that's just like how Rocky is, right? He refuses to defend himself and leaves himself open. But what struck me in this fight was, as great as the ninth round was, there is part of me that went back and said, the third round might be as good as the ninth. And then the fifth round, that was as good as the third and probably as good as the ninth. And it started off with a bang because I don't know if you remember or not, but the first round, these are both body punchers, right? They're both body punchers. That's their hallmark, their signature. they both came out against type, and they both went headhunting in the first round. And the very first punch was a hook from Ward to Gatti that stunned him. And then Gatti hit Ward with a hook that cut his eye. So there was a cut right at the very beginning of this fight. It was the beginning of the blood of Irish Mickey Ward. And it just got better from there on out.
And leading up to this fight, I think there was the narrative of Mickey Ward sort of seemed like his career was sort of winding down and ending. And then he had a fight against Neary leading prior to this for the WBU light welterweight title. On that he got that under his belt, and then that he was able to face Gatti. And he's had a little bit of a resurgence, so you had fans who really were sort of cheering his comeback. And I think that really added sort of the Hollywood-esque feel to his story, because this guy who's down and out is now trying to get back to the top of his game.
Yeah, he had not had a lot of success against championship level fighters. He had fought a lot in his career, and he had a huge fan base. But he had said if he had lost to Gatti, he was going to retire. And then he won that fight, and then there was a lot of interest around him and a lot of money, and he thought, all right, well, let's have a rematch because we'll take one more cash. And they didn't necessarily want the rematch, the promoter. They thought, oh, we may make some money, but, we don't know whether or not they can repeat this, and it might be a dud. They had the rematch, and it was a pretty good fight. It was clearly more Gatti. And then they wanted a third one, and Gatti said he wouldn't fight anybody except Ward, because Ward stood up and said, I'll give you the second fight, when he didn't have to. And so Gatti said, I'm going to give you the third one. And the two of them ended up becoming pretty close and pretty good friends. And when Arturo Gatti was inducted into the Hall of Fame, he had passed away a couple years prior to his eligibility to be in the Hall of Fame. It was Irish Mickey Ward that gave the speech to introduce him. And he said the two of them, for as brutal as that fight was, they remained incredibly cordial and had a really great relationship. Mickey Ward tells a story about after the second fight, they both got sent to the same hospital, and they were in the same room with the little curtain, and they pulled the curtain back, and Gatti was on the other side. And the very first thing he said is "Hey Mick, are you okay? How you feel? Are you okay?" Like nothing about anything else. They just really cared about each other for two guys that just beat the ever living crap out of each other.
I always find that amazing about boxing. It's like these fighters, they're all professional and cordial with each other after they just got done wailing on each other for 10 rounds or however long the fight lasts. And it's always amazing to me. I don't know if I could have that kind of composure.
Yeah, it's funny you had said that it's the Hollywood story of Irish Mickey Ward. Well, the movie The Fighter is about Irish Mickey Ward with Christian Bale. So if you want to learn more about Mickey Ward, go and watch that. But oh man, what a great fight, and it is fantastic. I really thank you, Jeff, for posting that one, because I got to go back and watch that fight, and it was glorious.
Yeah, and so what we're going to do, we're going to post the 9th round on our social media. So if anyone who's watching this wants to check out the 9th round and sort of have a flashback to some fantastic boxing, when boxing was kind of the ruler of the fighting. We didn't have really UFC and all of that wasn't that big back then. So it's a great watch. It's just a few minutes, but I recommend everyone check it out if you like boxing. I want to move on to some baseball.
Okay.
And in 1964, on May 23rd, we actually posted about Ken Bauer, who had a pretty solid game, but it wasn't really about the game itself. This was highlighting sort of Ken Bauer in his year in 1964 with the Cardinals. He played some outfield, but spent most of his time at third. And he's usually remembered as... he's kind of the unsung hero of the 1964 World Series. He gets overlooked a bit. And that was the World Series where the Cardinals faced the Yankees. And then the Cardinals would win 2 more rings, although not with Ken Bauer, but they won later in 1967 against the Red Sox. And then they actually won the pennant in 68, but lost the series to the Tigers. But Ken Boyer was on a team of a lot of big names in baseball, right? And but without him, maybe they don't win the 1964 World Series.
Yeah, probably not. That was clearly his best year, but you're right. He's forgotten a lot outside of St. Louis, other than, and in St. Louis, he's got his number retired. He's a member of the Cardinals Hall of Fame, but he's sort of on that group of players on the outside of the National Baseball Hall of Fame looking in. And even on his own team, if they had, jersey sale tracking the way that we do now, he probably wouldn't be a top 3 or 4 jersey seller even on his own Cardinals, because that was Bob Gibson's team and Lou Brock and Bill White and Dick Groat and Curt Flood. So there was a lot of star power on those St. Louis Cardinal teams. But in 1964, he wasn't just the MVP of the Cardinals, he was the MVP of Major League Baseball.
Yeah, and I think if you look at the World Series, in Game 4, he had a grand slam. They won that game 4-3 off Al Downing.
Yes, everyone, it's that Al Downing from
That's right.
the Hank Aaron home run.
And if he doesn't, they went down early. They went down 3-0 at first inning. And if he doesn't have that grand slam, that evened up the series. They're 3-1, and that was on the road at Yankee Stadium. They're 3-1, and now, that's a really tough place to be against the Yankees. And so, it's quite possible without that grand slam. And then in Game 7 of that series, he hit a solo home run, and that extended their lead from 6-3 to 7-3. The final was 7-5, so he did give the Cardinals a bit of breathing room. He led in power. He led that World Series, although there wasn't a lot of power in general because it's such a pitcher-heavy era. But he was really integral to them winning that 64 series.
Yeah, and he's remembered for the home run, but he also had a double and a single. That was a 3-hit game for him. And what everybody remembers about the home run is that his brother Clete Boyer for the Yankees also hit a home run in that game, and that was the only time that a pair of brothers have ever homered in the same World Series game. And that's what people remember. They remember the trivia question, not necessarily the importance of that home run and the importance of it to the Cardinals when you're talking about like what kick-started the resurgence of the Cardinals in the 60s. And it was arguably this season by Ken Boyer and some help from Bob Gibson and Bill White and Dick Groat, Lou Brock.
The interesting thing about Ken Boyer, I think one of the reasons he gets a little overlooked in terms of his career and his impact is, he was a solid third baseman. He wasn't as good defensively as someone like Brooks Robinson, but he didn't have the bat like Eddie Matthews, so he was kind of an in-betweener there. Even though I looked over his numbers, and if you kind of look a little more under the surface level, I think now if those numbers existed today, he'd probably be viewed a little more favorably. I think the analytics would probably rate him a little bit better if they used something like WAR. Going back, he was over a decade. He was in the top 6 MLB position players for WAR. So, and think whatever you want of WAR, but he was, it shows that he was a valuable player, and maybe some of his peripherals didn't really come through during that era. That wasn't something they looked at. Everything was a very straightforward statistics. But I looked at some of the similarity scores. These are not third basemen, but at least in terms of comps and in terms of bat, you have someone like Paul O'Neill, Bobby Bonilla, Reggie Smith. Those are pretty solid hitters that we all remember, and not just because they're a little more relevant, because they were pretty impactful. So you kind of wonder if he sort of played on a different team or played in a different era, maybe he gets a little more attention.
Yeah, and I think if he had gotten over 300 home runs, that would probably have changed, because when he was being considered for Hall of Fame, there were pretty strict numbers that the voters were looking for. They wanted 3,000 hits. They wanted over 300 home runs, preferably 400. And he just didn't have that. He was a really good, complete player. And when you start to look at some of the other things, he has the 11 All-Star games. But let's remember that for 4 years, they had 2 All-Star games, and he
Right.
was in both of them. So that was 8 All-Star games in 4 years. That inflates the number a little bit. And voters, for some reason, have always been a little bit squidgy when it comes to third baseman.
Yeah.
It's one of the most underrepresented positions in baseball. It's starting to be corrected. But yeah, and I can't say that I disagree with the Hall of Fame voters, which I love to do that. I love to disagree with committees. But I don't think they necessarily got this wrong because, Bobby Bonilla and Paul O'Neill and Fred Lynn, Dwight Evans. Dwight Evans has better numbers than him, and Dwight Evans is just outside of the Hall of Fame. There has to be those guys. There's got to be those 10 guys that are just outside. Because if you let those 10 guys in, there's just 10 more guys that are just outside. So there has to be a line at some point. And for me, I think they got this one right when it comes to the Hall of Fame. But that doesn't mean he's a scrub, and that doesn't mean he shouldn't be remembered, and that doesn't mean he shouldn't be appreciated. That he was a very, very good player that if you're unfamiliar with Ken Boyer, become familiar with him.
Yeah, what do they say? It's not the Hall of Very Good, it's the Hall of Great. But I think the challenge he had in the era he played, third base was always looked at as a really defensive heavy position through the first half of the 20th century, and then kind of coming out of the 50s and into the 60s is when you really started seeing a little more offensive power coming from that hot corner. And so I think for voters, they're kind of looking back. They still have a frame of reference in terms of kind of what kind of Hall of Fame players make it in, what kind of third basemen make it into the Hall of Fame. So the voters from that era are looking at that, and he sort of suffered from that, not having that defensive pedigree, and then not blowing anyone away with those numbers, as I mentioned earlier. But yeah, I agree with you. Very good player. I mean, lots of players have gotten overlooked. I think Ron Santo was overlooked for a very long time. He finally got in after many, many years. He was probably, he's a better player than Ken Boyer, but it just shows that third base was sort of, as you said, a kind of a tricky position for Hall of Fame voters.
And he was on the ballot with Ron Santo with the Veterans Committee when they looked at that particular era, because guys that are no longer on the ballot, for those wondering how it works, there are certain players that are nominated from eras that are no longer ballot eligible, and then their careers are reviewed and they're voted on by this special committee. And that's how Ron Santo got in. Ken Boyer has been on that list twice, I believe, and fallen far short each time, even though he does have the 5 Gold Gloves and the 8 20 home run seasons and the 5 seasons over 300. But just the 1 MVP. But hey, heck of a player. He's got a World Series ring, and he was a part of a very good ball club and a key part of it.
I wanted to mention something I looked up, and it kind of blew me away. So he won MVP, as we said, in 1964, and he beat out Frank Robinson, who came in 4th in voting. Joe Torre came in 5th. Willie Mays came in 6th, which actually I found really crazy because Willie Mays had 47 home runs and 111 RBIs. He slugged .607 and had an OPS of 990. And he was 6th in voting, and his numbers clearly were superior. If WAR existed, the analytics people figured out his WAR. He would have had an 11 WAR, which is massive. He probably got hurt by the Giants finishing 4th, though probably not his fault. They probably are lucky to finish 4th. If they didn't have him, they'd probably finish even further down. But I just was blown away by Willie Mays with all those numbers only coming in 6th. But sign of the times, right? It's what people valued at that time.
It's a lot of it had to do with, were you the best player on the best team?
Right.
And to think about where the Cardinals were. The Cardinals, they were 11 games back on August 4th. 11! And they ended up coming back and beating the Phillies for the pennant by 1 game. There were no playoffs at that time, so you just had to have the best record in your league, and that's certainly what hurt the Giants and Willie Mays. But yeah, they were 11 games back on August 4th, and that's a pretty big hill to climb.
Yeah. Yeah, and not to say that Bauer didn't have good numbers, 24 home runs, 119 RBIs. He hit almost 300, hit 854 OPS, but, by comparison, not nearly anywhere in what Mays did. So, yeah, really interesting guy. I agree with you. If fans aren't aware of Ken Bauer, definitely check him out. Let's move on to another sort of mid-20th century team. Going back to 1959, it was a rare down year for the Yankees that year. On May 20th, which is when we posted, they lost to the Tigers and dropped to last place. And they hadn't seen the basement since 1940 season, almost 20 years. And it was the only season between 1955 and 1964 that the Yankees failed to win a pennant. So, rough year for the Yankees. I think they recovered okay, right?
They did. And when you read that number, that's crazy to think about that. And part of it is, okay, well, they didn't have to go through the playoffs in order to win. But at the same time, they also had to have the best record in the American League to win the pennant. So it's sort of double-edged. It's not like they could have a bad year, sneak in as a wild card, get hot in the playoffs, and make it through that way. They had to be the best team for that many years,
right?
Which was insanity. But that's a really great era of Yankee baseball that brought some of the greatest stars that have ever worn pinstripes have been played during those years.
Something I think gets overlooked because everyone sort of talks about the Yankees and their muscle and their ability to just bring stars in, and they had a lot of advantages being at the center of the sports world, and they had money advantages, and there was everything, there wasn't the collective bargaining agreements like we have now. It's a bit of an unregulated sort of environment for baseball. But I do think they deserve a lot of credit because, they had a lot of players coming in and then leaving. In 1951, that was really the bridge from DiMaggio to Mantle era. And, they had to figure out how to remain competitive and win constantly, but also bringing in new talent and continuing that winning tradition. And I think that doesn't get enough attention. I mean, it's easy to hate on the Yankees, but you got to respect what they were able to do year in, year out.
And it's about their ability to find Ken Bauer type players. Right. We just talked about Ken Bauer not being a Hall of Famer, but really being a key guy that contributes. And you think about the history of the Yankees, even if you look at that recent success, the 96 to sort of 2000, yes, you had Hall of Famer Derek Jeter on the team, and you had Hall of Famer Mariano Rivera, and that sort of group of people, but it was Paul O'Neill and Jorge Posada and Bernie Williams and Scott Brocious and those type of players that helped build around the Tino Martinez's and that were on those rosters. And that was the same in this era. And when I was looking at those dates and these teams that you had talked about, Jeff, two guys really jumped out at me. One in the beginning part of the Yankee dynasty and one in the later part. And that was Hank Bauer and Elston Howard. And those are two of those guys who are not National Baseball Hall of Famers, but were really important to their teams and very good players. And yes, I know Elston Howard has his number retired. He's a Yankee Hall of Famer, but not a MLB Hall of Famer. But those were the kind of guys that made that streak, with the exception of the 1 year there in 59, possible.
Yeah, Elston Howard did win an MVP, and so he was. I mean, I hate to say it, but a complimentary piece when you're on a team with Yogi Berra and Mantle and all. But you're right. I mean, you do need those players, even to have a stacked roster like the Yankees always seem to have. You definitely need those guys, and we see this all the time in current MLB, right? You have, it's sometimes not the star players that win the championship for you. It's the Ken Bauer, right, in the '64 Cardinals, who had the grand slam in the World Series, and everyone remembers Bob Gibson, but without Ken Boyer, you're not winning that game. You're probably not winning the series. And so, Elston Howard, Hank Bauer, there are the sort of that glue that sort of brings the team together and allows the stars to flourish.
Yeah, and Ken Boyer, he won 9 pennants and 7 World Series. That's getting it done. He had a 17-game hitting streak in the World Series.
But you misspoke. You meant Hank Bauer.
Hank Bauer, yeah. That's Ken Boyer. No, sorry, yeah, Hank Bauer. No. Ken Boyer's brother Cleet was on the Yankees. Yeah, but Hank Bauer, 7 World Series wins, 9 pennants, 17-game hitting streak in the World Series. How many guys even play 17 World Series games?
Right.
Let alone to have a hitting streak go that long.
Yeah, I think a lot of people overlook him, and everyone says, "Oh, as the Yankees, they won it all the time," and so 7, big deal. He was just a kind of lucky to be on that lineup. The only person that won more World Series was Yogi Berra. He has the same number of World Series as Mickey Mantle. He's got more than Whitey Ford and Phil Rizzuto. So, sure, you benefit from sort of the team that you're with, but you're also a big part of ensuring that team does win those World Series.
And he was a pretty neat guy because he had always wanted to be a pro baseball player, but he enlisted in the Marine Corps right after Pearl Harbor when he was just sort of out of high school. And he fought in the Battle of Guadalcanal, and he fought in the Battle of Guam, and he was a platoon leader in the Battle of Okinawa, and he earned Purple Heart, Bronze Star. And so, I don't know, getting booed at Fenway, probably not going to bother a guy like Hank Bauer. And he was one of the guys. And we think about that fight that the Yankees got in at the Copacabana down in Miami during spring training that ended up ultimately getting Billy Martin fired. But that's a night where Billy Martin is going out with Whitey Ford and Mickey Mantle and all of the stars. And who's with him? Hank Bauer. He's like he's just one of the dudes that is going along with them to see Sammy Davis Jr. at the Copacabana when they get in a massive brawl, which they win, by the way, because who wants to fight Hank Bauer in the back of a bar? Nobody, because they're going to lose. The man's made of stone. But yeah, he's kind of forgotten in Yankee lore, but such a presence. And just like Ken Boyer of the Cardinals, like those two guys, you can't get through that era without them. And then he's the bridge to a guy that's part of the second half in Elston Howard, who remarkably is the first black player for the Yankees that it took that long in 1955. They were one of the last teams to bring in a player that had played in the Negro Leagues, and he had started there his first year. He could have gone to any number of colleges and played, and he chose to go and play in Kansas City, the Monarchs. He was a roommate of Ernie Banks. It's like, you want to learn how to play? Yeah, be Ernie Banks' roommate when you're a rookie. Right. That'll you want to learn how to be a Yankee? Like, that will teach you. Even though I know obviously Ernie Banks is a Cub, but Ernie Banks will teach you how to fit in the Yankee way.
Yeah, I want to throw something out at you because people forget, or people who haven't looked at it closely don't know just how dominant the Yankees were. But this is the best analogy that I could think of. It would be like combining Jordan's 90s Bulls at their peak with the 1980s Oilers and the 1950s Canadians. Combining it all, and just during this period from 1949 to 1965 or so, they combine them all in just a continuous dominance. That's how good. If you're not a baseball fan, maybe you're a hockey fan and a basketball fan, and that'll make sense. Just how dominant the Yankees were during this stretch.
Yeah, they certainly were. And just to clarify for everybody, he's talking about the Edmonton Oilers, not the Houston Oilers, not Warren Moon.
Right.
But Gretzky, Messier, Jari Kurri, Esa, those guys. Yeah, it's unbelievable the amount of winning that they were able to do over such a, I guess, not a short period of time, but that we haven't seen the likes of it, even with the wild cardness of baseball. It's baseball, for as much as everyone says, that it's stacked against all the little teams and nobody has a chance. There's a lot of parity over the past 25 years in baseball compared to other sports and who wins the championship.
Yeah, for sure. It's just such an interesting period in baseball. I find some of the history around it, and just all the sort of the branches that extend from the Yankees. Because you're right, they brought in a lot of players who were, really could have been on other teams and didn't necessarily start or took another role with the Yankees, and that was just to keep building that winning momentum and keep it going, is because that was the expectation. The Yankees always win. That was their expectation every year. They expect to win the World Series.
Mm-hmm. And for Elston Howard was probably the most perfect person to be able to be the first African American player and survive in that environment. And not that it was, and I'm sure that he faced a tremendous amount of racism in his life, but in terms of the Yankees, it's like almost harder to live up to the Yankee way and all of the things that are expected of you as a Yankee. That's like a whole other level of things that are piled on you. And the Yankees did a very good job of making Elston Howard fit in. He had said that he never could have gone through what Jackie Robinson went through, and he didn't necessarily have to with the Yankees. One of the stories that he tells is that when he had first gotten up in 1955 and they had gone to a restaurant and he couldn't get in, that Hank Bauer came over to the maitre d' and said, "He's a Yankee, he's with us," and he walked right into the restaurant and sat down and ate. And when Ralph Houck became the manager after Casey Stengel was let go, Ralph Houck immediately said that, we're going to change where we do spring training, and we're going to leave our spring training facility, and we're going to go and we're going to set up in Fort Lauderdale because we can have integrated housing because we're all going to live together because this is nonsense. And so the Yankees, it took them a while to get there, but once they got there, they were there. And Elston Howard has always talked highly of that sort of experience that he had being with the Yankees.
All right, well, Hank Bauer, 7 World Series, and one heck of a guy, sounds like.
Yeah, Hank Bauer.
Yeah.
Thank you for your service.
Exactly. All right, well, let's move on to some NBA. And want to talk about a great player. We've been talking about a lot of great players with the Yankees, but I want to talk about one particular great player from the NBA on May 24th in 1978. In the 4th season of what looked like a very promising career, Bill Walton with Trailblazers, known as Big Red, won his only MVP. This followed the season prior where he was second in MVP voting. And he unfortunately would sustain serious injury in the playoffs that year, and he would limit him to only one season in the following 4. And the one season that he did play, it was only 14 games, and the injuries sort of derailed his career. He had a little bit of a comeback towards the end. He won Sixth Man of the Year award one time. But I think a lot of people remember him for his broadcasting rather than his NBA career, because he sort of reinvented himself as this kind of tie-dye wearing, free spirit, sort of someone who'd go off on these tangents about music and culture and so forth during his broadcast. But just such a fascinating character, and by all accounts, anyone who ever came across him was like just an amazing human being.
Yeah, pretty much everybody loved him except Shaq. Shaq was like the only person that ever talked poorly about him, and Shaq talked really poorly about him. Shaq hated himself some Bill Walton, even though Bill Walton kind of liked Shaq. but yeah, a really interesting cat. And for people of a certain age, they will remember how great Bill Walton was as a player when he was at UCLA, winning all of those championships, and when he had first gotten to the Portland Trailblazers. And it was unfortunate what happened with Portland with the problems that he had with his ankles and his feet, and the medical staff who really wasn't prepared to treat him accordingly, and that left a real messy feeling in Portland. And he demanded a trade and had sat out, and his feet never got healthy again. But when he was playing, he dominated the NBA in the same way that he dominated college.
Yeah, he's actually one of only four players that's won multiple NCAA and multiple NBA championships. He won he won one with the Blazers, and then later with the Celtics he won a championship and coming off the bench. So that's pretty remarkable. But I was looking up some of his performances in the finals in 1977, and he had a near quadruple double in the finals in the series clinching game 6. He had 20 points, 23 rebounds, 7 assists, and 8 blocks. And at the time, the 8 blocks was an NBA record. And actually, in 3 of those 6 finals games, he posted more than 20 rebounds. It's a pretty remarkable series for him.
It was, and he was playing against Dr. J.
Yeah.
Of Philadelphia in that series. And yeah, he just, the way that the Trailblazers were a different organization and a different team with him on the floor as opposed to him not. And what's crazy about this MVP year is he only played 58 games, I believe, out of the 82. And so he left after 60 games is when he got hurt, and they were 50-10 in the first 60 games with Bill Walton, and they were 8-14 the remainder of the season without him. And then he came back and he played one game in the playoffs, and then the second game that he played in the playoffs is where he got hurt. So it was like a game and a half only in that 78 season, and that was the end of his Blazers tenure. But he was just a tough matchup, because I think this is maybe the first time, perhaps you saw a little bit with Wilt, even more so than with Bill Russell, but he was really a post point, if that makes any sense, like a guy that runs the offense from the block.
No, right.
That was Bill Walton. It was like the ball came in to him, and then he decided how they was going to facilitate it. There were a lot of cuts to the basket. There were a lot of guys, that would sort of flare for mid-range shots. But it's like the ball had to go into the post, and then he was such a good passer and so creative, and his ability to make space in order to pass the ball, or to make space in order to shoot a mid-range shot. Not everything was a layup or to the rim with him. It was a real different offense than I think most people had seen at that time in the NBA.
Yeah, you mentioned Dr. J. Despite losing that 1977 finals to Walton and the Blazers, he called Bill Walton's performance an inspiration. He was so blown away by Walton and his game and his ability. And I think the thing that people also overlook, his defense was so complete. I mean, he was a rebound machine, and he could block, but he could do everything. And he was 2-time all defense. In fact, he was also named in the late 90s, they had the all-time greatest 50 NBA players. He was named to that team despite having such a limited career. So that just shows how the early part of his career and the trajectory he was on was pretty incredible, and it's just sad to see that the injuries really derailed him.
And he was also huge in terms of getting them to play faster. Mm-hmm. So when he was playing in that MVP season, they were averaging 107.5 possessions per game. When he was not playing, they were 103.5. So they went from like the second fastest team to the second slowest team that year when he was playing. When he was playing, they had an assist on 58% of their buckets. When he didn't play, it was 54. They dropped 4% in their ability to run their offense efficiently. That's just how important he was. But most importantly, they went from 50-10 to 8-14, and that's a result of their inability to move the ball in the same manner without him that they were with him.
So that's his playing career. I want to talk a little bit about his broadcast career. Did you like him as a broadcaster?
I loved him, then I hated him, then I loved him again. So when he first started, I thought he was great. And then I was like, my God, Bill, could we watch the game? Can we watch the game, Bill? Please, can we watch the game? And then the more I got back to him, the more I appreciated him and was glad and really happy when he was there. And what I realized was that I didn't dislike Bill Walton. I disliked Dave Pash. I disliked John Shambi, the guys that he was with, his play-by-play guys. They were the ones that were actually annoying me, not Bill Walton. And I did really enjoy him in the later years. And when he discovered the Maui Invitational, I always thought that right before Thanksgiving to get a big hot scooping heap of Bill Walton was fantastic. And I really hope that they name the MVP award of the Maui Gym for him. They did not do that after his death, which I thought they should have immediately. But I hope they do, because nobody encapsulated that tournament better than Bill Walton.
Yeah, he had a real passion for the game. He loved connecting with fans. He loved just life, right? He was just someone who really appreciated sort of his day, and it was hard to imagine Bill Walton having a bad day. He just sort of took everything with a grain of salt, and he really reinvented himself as a broadcaster. He won an Emmy as a broadcaster. And he was also named as one of the top 50 sportscasters of all time in 2009. So it's pretty amazing to see him go from this sort of intense player, because he gave off such a laid-back feel. But to play at the level that he did in both college and pro, you had to be a pretty intense player. And it's pretty interesting to see sort of that change in his personality and who he was. And maybe maybe he had a lot of thoughts when he was going through the injuries and sort of reevaluated his life, and that could have played into it. But I just find that transformation really fascinating.
And for somebody that was able to discover communication, because he had a speech impediment and was very shy about talking for a very long period of his life, including his playing days at UCLA and his beginning of his career at Portland, which sort of rubbed some media people the wrong way that maybe didn't understand his struggle to communicate. But one of the funny stories that was told after his passing was from Jay Billis, who they became pretty good friends at the Maui Gym, because Bill would do about half the games and Jay would do the other half. And he always called him Jake. He never called him Jay. He always called him Jake. All the time. And he said he never knew whether he just thought his name was Jake or whether he just was doing that for fun. And he never figured it out. He said, I never knew. But he used to say to me, Jake, Coach K was as important to you as John Wooden was to me. But I can assure you, Jake, that you were not as important to Coach K as I was to Coach Wooden. And he said he would always say that all the time. And he would just start laughing because, he had that really neat relationship with Coach Wooden. And he liked to rib other players about not being quite good enough, which is why he felt he worked so well on those Celtics teams, because Robert Parrish is the same way, like Robert and Kevin McHale and Larry Bird, like those guys, they're all cut from that same personality, and he fit in there probably better than anywhere he's ever fit in his whole life.
Yeah, so Bill Walton, we miss you. Passed away. He's no longer with us, so miss his broadcasts, miss kind of all his philosophy. Okay, let's move on to Monica Seles. Do a little tennis. How about
Yeah.
that? So on May 21st in the year 2000, Monica Seles continued her dominant career as a tennis player. She won the Italian Open. It was her second, and it was the 47th of her 50 WTA World Tour titles. She that she would win, and she included 9 Grand Slams, 3 WTA finals, and 3 Fed Cup finals. So pretty stellar career. She's probably most remembered for a really tragic day where, while in Germany, an individual came out of the stands and stabbed her. And that really sort of was the downfall of her career. She did try to make a comeback, and she had a little bit of a comeback, but she was just never the same, even by her own admission. Sort of juxtapose this against Bill Walton, who had an injury that derailed his career. Obviously, he didn't have as an extensive career, but she went through a similar challenge where never really recovered from that.
Yeah, and it was most all of it was mental. She was
Yeah.
very fortunate in the stabbing incident that it was honestly just a flesh wound that he missed her spine, which would have made this a really tragic story. But it almost in effect ended her career because she was on a path of winning Grand Slams at a rapid pace. And the early 90s really belonged to her. And it looked like we were going to have a decade of her versus Steffi Graf.
Yeah.
And we never got that. And it also was unfortunate for Steffi Graf because Graf one has to sort of live with I didn't have competition because Monica wasn't there. And also the reason that Monica got stabbed was because of Steffi Graf.
Right.
That the fan that stabbed her was upset with Monica Seles for beating Steffi Graf, and he wanted Steffi Graf to be the number one player in the world again, and so he attacked Monica Seles. So Steffi Graf had that to deal with, on top of us as tennis people losing that great rivalry, and the concern obviously for Monica Seles and her health and her mental health to have to go through something like that. But it really killed something that could have been so beautiful for all of us to watch for a 10-year period.
Yeah, I mean, and from a very young age, she was dominant. And tennis aficionados sometimes say, oh, Steffi Graf was probably the best tennis player I ever saw. But during the Seles era, she was actually always playing catch up, it seemed, to Monica Seles. And, Seles sort of owned her in those head-to-head matchups, except for Wimbledon. I think Graf had an advantage in Wimbledon. But other than that, Seles was really, would beat her pretty good. And it wasn't until Seles sort of disappeared from the scene because she was gone for a couple of years, while she dealt with the fallout of her injury and trying to decide if she even wanted to come back and play. And that's when Graf won, I believe it was, six titles during that period where she was out. So you're right, it did rob all fans and really Seles herself of just what could have been such a beautiful, amazing, one of the all-time great careers.
Yeah, for me, Monica Seles, when I think about who's the greatest female tennis player that I've seen, and the easy answer is Serena, right? That's the easy answer. But Seles was Serena before Serena was Serena.
Right.
And if it had not been for the stabbing, Serena could have been chasing Monica Seles because she could have won Grand Slams up until 2003, 2004, 2005, into the Serena era. So she could have taken some of those away from Serena and taken some of those away from Steffi Graf, and she could be sitting in the 20s very easily because her game was, like I said, it was Serena before Serena was Serena, and they played each other only 5 times, her and Serena, and that was when Serena was right in her prime, and Seles was through the comeback and almost ready to retire. So the very end of Seles and the beginning of the dominance of Serena. And Serena won 4 of those 5 matchups, but they all were 3 sets, except for one, and that one was 7-5, 7-6. So all of them were close when it was Serena at her best and Monica not at her best. And they were tight down to the wire, 3 setters. So I am not convinced that without the stabbing, that Monica Seles wouldn't be the greatest female tennis player of all time.
Yeah,
It would be close. It would be very close. And not to take anything away from Serena, she's amazing. But it would be, I would like to be able to have that conversation. I would like to have seen them play.
Yeah, and just to add on to your point, I mean, Celis turned pro at 15. And she has a number of records at the time, and I think some of them still stand, about certain accomplishments and milestones in tennis for the youngest ever to do it. And so she was just such a phenomenal player whose game was so complete at such a young age, and she wasn't afraid of anyone. She could adapt her game to really take on sort of, depending on the style of play she was facing or the court she was on, she was a formidable opponent. And you're right. It's very possible Serena could be chasing Celis.
And Chris Everett, who had played her when she would first come up at 15, Chris Everett said, "I played Monica and I knew it was time to go." She said she beat me like I was a club pro. And she played Navratilova. She played Billie Jean King. She played Tracy Austin.
Yeah.
Chris Everett played everybody. And she said she's never just felt more out of place on a tennis court than when she played Monica Seles. And that was Monica Seles at 15, 16.
Yeah, if you asked all the players in her era, who did you fear the most, they all say Monica Seles.
For sure.
That was who they feared. And, to her credit, when she returned, she actually won the Toronto Open in 1995, so that was her first tournament back from her injury. And then she did reach the U.S. Open, and she lost in the finals to Steffi Graf. And then she won the Australian Open in 1996 as her ninth and last sort of Grand Slam win. But she said in the end she never felt fully comfortable, and I'm sure that in the back of her mind she's got that kind of fear and concern that is someone going to come out of the stands and be waiting for her because, psychologically, as you said, it does something to you as a competitor and as someone who's really vulnerable on the court. And we see this in so many other sports where, athletes are really vulnerable on the field and on the court, and they're so focused on their game and what's going on the field, and sometimes they don't see things going on in the stands or around them.
Right, and you certainly don't expect something like that to happen, and so it's just a terrible thing that happened to Monica Seles. But you had said, remember, she came back and she won her one Grand Slam after the stabbing incident was at the Australian Open, and she had a 33-0 record at the Australian Open up until 1999 when she lost her first match to Martina Hingis.
Yeah,
so
amazing.
Dominant at the Australian Open.
Yeah, amazing. Okay, well, the final segment I want to get into is some hockey.
Okay.
We got a lot of hockey still going on. And so this is really about a couple different posts from the 80s, NHL from the 80s. So we posted on May 19th. In 1984, Pat LaFontaine scored 2 goals just 22 seconds apart in Game 5 of the Stanley Cup. He was with the Islanders. They had a dominant run of 4 straight Cup wins. But despite LaFontaine's heroics, Wayne Gretzky, Grant Fuhr, and a host of other stars would end up winning that series, and they would win their first of 5 Cups over the next 7 years. We also posted about Patrick Roy, one of a fan favorite for so many people. On May 22nd in 1986, he made 15 saves on 15 shots to win Game 4 of the Stanley Cup against the Calgary Flames. Montreal would close out the next game, and they would win the Cup. It was the first of 23 total playoff shutouts for Roy, and the first of 4 Stanley Cups. He won 2 with Montreal, and then he won another 2 with the Avs. I think Patrick Roy, I think a lot of people know about, even sort of casual hockey. Pat LaFontaine is someone I don't think a lot of people know about, right?
Yeah, Pat LaFontaine is one of the more underrated Hall of Famers. Let's not act like he's not a Hall of Famer,
Right,
but he really is, and because he was there at the end of the Islanders in their reign, and we see him. They lose this game to the Oilers, and that was really the end of the Islanders. There we go. Islanders, big New York day today, as we know it. And it was the beginning, the dawning of Gretzky and Messier and the Oilers. And then he had some time in Buffalo with Alexander McGillney, and then he ended up as a New York Ranger. And oddly for me, I remember him more as a New York Ranger, probably just because of the time that he played there and the age that I was at the time. But Pat LaFontaine was always sort of just after or just before the greatness. He was on that 1984 Olympic team in Sarajevo, coming off of the 1980 Miracle on Ice, and they went to Sarajevo, and the boys just got blitzed in Sarajevo, and the magic was gone. And it was the same thing against the Islanders, and poof, the magic is gone, even though he was such a great individual player.
Yeah, he did have a career shortened by injuries and concussions. He retired at age 33, and it's pretty young. Hockey players, many of the greats have played for a very long time. And he had the unfortunate happening to exist in the same era as Gretzky, Lemieux, Yzerman, Messier. So he's sort of buried behind some of these sort of generational talents. It was such a fantastic period of hockey for those great centers. And even in his best year, he finished behind Lemieux in sort of all the meaningful statistic categories. Never won a Hart Trophy, never won a Stanley Cup. So I think a lot of people, he kind of falls off the radar. I think I was actually trying to think about today's game, and I feel like he would be probably, if he played in today's era, I think he would be a lot more favorably viewed.
Yes.
And I think the one thing that was much different now than back then is that he was an American-born star, right? And and the media now is, especially the American sports media, they want to promote American-born stars, but back then it was all about Canadian players.
Yeah, it was almost like it was a detriment to be American. It was like that was a demerit if you were an American. Like, oh, you can't be that good. He's an American. Ugh. Right. So, but I agree with you that he would have some endorsement deals coming out the Yang now, and he also would fit today's game because he was such a good skater, which was crazy because he was a terrible skater when he was a kid. Like, he almost gave up hockey because he couldn't skate. And then as he developed, became a really good skater. And one of the things he was very good at was holding on to the puck to the very last minute before being able to pass it, which is something that is very much valued in today's hockey. But I think it's crazy with this. What was was it 20, how many seconds was it, Jeff, on this?
22 seconds.
22 seconds. What if I told you that that's nothing? That's crap. That's a crap achievement. 22 seconds for Pat LaFontaine. What if I told you that was a crap achievement for him?
No, I don't think that's.
I would say it is. I would say 22 seconds is a crap achievement, and this is why. In 1983, when he was preparing on Team USA and they were going through their pre-Olympic schedule, and they were playing games around the country as like warm-up games and that, they went to Salt Lake City and they played the Golden Eagles minor league team. Goaltender one Jim Craig, who was the 1980 Miracle on Ice goalie. Pat LaFontaine, 2 goals that night, 21 seconds apart. What if I told you, Jeff, the 21 seconds is a crap stat? What if I told you that? Would you believe me? If I told you it was a crap stat, 21 seconds for Pat LaFontaine?
I feel like this is the 8-minute abs. Thing was what if I told you 8-minute abs was crap? Because I could get you rock solid abs in 7 minutes.
7 minutes, right? And if you're not happy with 7 minutes, I'll give you the extra minute free. Right? What if I told you it was crap? Would you believe? I bet you would believe me now. You wouldn't have believed me 2 minutes ago, but you believe me now.
I'm going to reserve judgment to see where this goes.
1985. Right? 1985. Game in February. against the Hartford Whalers. Pat LaFontaine, 2 goals, 8 seconds apart.
Wow. Okay, now I'm impressed.
Yeah. So I saw that. I said, 22. Nah.
Well, that actually ties to the point that I was going to make. He had 1.17 points per game, which is the highest rate by an American-born player. And it puts him on the same tier as sort of a lot of the modern offensive players. And so that's another reason I think he'd probably be a lot more celebrated in today's game. Because they would call him basically an efficiency monster, right? They would talk about
absolutely. And if you think, if he's doing 1.1 then,
right,
he's going to do 1.2 and a half, 1.3 now.
Right.
So I agree with you. I think he would be a highly, not just a highly valued player, but I think he'd be a really marketable player. Now, particularly if he's playing, the Rangers and the Islanders now.
I looked up. I wanted to see what a fair comp for today's players would be, and I'm curious, a little more about some of these players than me. But sort of a combination of Jack Hughes and Braden Point.
I can see that. Maybe a little less physical than Braden Point, but
fast, good skater.
He's fast.
High rate for scoring. I think not slouches by any means.
No,
he was just a great player. So, just like Ken Boyer, for fans out there, if you don't know too much about Pat LaFontaine, just because he doesn't have a Stanley Cup under his belt, doesn't have a Hart Trophy, you should still look him up. Because still pretty amazing player, still pretty great player.
You know why people don't know him, Jeff? He scores too fast. He scores so fast you don't even know he was on the ice. He's back on the bench. You're like, who was that? That?
Because I went to get my water and I came back and I missed his goal.
And all of a sudden it's 2-0. You're like, what happened?
Right.
What happened? Yeah, 3 times. Isn't that crazy? 3 times under 22 seconds for one dude.
But that just shows how he could just get hot.
Yeah, and that's within 3 years too. It's not even over a long time. It's 83, 85. That's nuts.
And you got to be a fast skater to be able to do that.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Clayton. We're gonna wrap it up there. Appreciate your thoughts and always have a good time chatting with you. For everyone out there, check us out on Facebook at Sports and Leisure. Check us out on YouTube, on Substack. Comment, share, like. As much as we love talking about history, we love sharing it even more. All right, Clayton, have a great week. Talk to you next
too,
time.
man.